We'll be back from the break and business today continues. Almost Said Coffee Court continues. Now we head into our coffee court tonight. Henry Musasizi, who is the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, did claim, in charge of general duties, did claim that the interest rate, which was zeroed at 9.65, was the lowest ever. And according to the NSSF Managing Director, COVID-19 was to blame for the low interest rate. And in our coffee court tonight, Fred Makubia digests the implication of the report with the CEO, Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority.
Well, it is a pleasure and thank you for joining us once again on this coffee court. Like the word suggests, it's where we discuss those critical, important, significant questions. And our discussion this time around rotates on the report that was issued by the National Social Security Fund. Just of recent, and just a few highlights that I need to put forward before us. I think in the history of Uganda, this is the first time that NSSF is releasing a report where the interest rate has actually gone very low, to 9.65%. And some of the other critical details that were issued in this AGM report relates to the savers that rose from 1.3, and amongst these, about 620,000 were members that were active, and about 695,000 people were people that were dormant. But we digest more of this report on the coffee court, and joining me is the Chief Executive Officer of the Uganda Retirement Benefit Regulatory Authority, Mr. Anthony Nsubuga. Once again, it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. You add Martin Anthony Nsubuga.
I am joined by Mr. Martin Anthony Nsubuga. I think that's now very right.
That's better.
Thank you. NSSF, the report is out. First of all, first and foremost, your take on the report.
First, the report is in order. I think the first thing to even understand, it is, I think, probably the fourth or fifth time when NSSF is having an annual general meeting.
That's remarkable to you?
Of course, because it's one of the requirements. Under the governance a framework that we have in this market established by the regulator and the rights of a member and the regulation that we've set, a retirement benefit scheme licensed by OBRA must have an annual general engagement with its members. And under that platform, they're supposed to provide a feedback of what transpired during the year. So for us, it is in order. The second one is on, you talked of the first time when they were issuing very low interest rates. Actually, times before the regulator, very many years ago, NSSF is an establishment of an act of 1985. They used to declare interest to members that was in, very low interest, very, very low. Actually, in negative real returns. Negative here means the interest being declared is below the inflation rate. So when we are talking of low interest rates today, it is precisely low compared to the rosy time that we've been experiencing, which is a very good observation. But it's also important to note that where we are coming from, there's a very significant improvement. But because when a kid is used to very good things and you start changing your habits, they begin to raise reasons, concerns. And I think your concern is very, very valid.
Okay.
So the low return of 9.65.
Maybe the figure itself. The comparison from the 14 in the previous year, it was about 12.5. Now it is at 9.65. The figure itself
is low. The thing is, what drives the interest rates? Interest rates are driven by investment income. So where is this money invested? This money is invested in government securities. I think almost 80%, it's around 78% of the assets of NSSF are invested in government securities. Now, what has been the historical trend? The interest rate that has been declared, when you look at the returns or the yields on government securities to date, I think they've hit around 16.5, almost 18. But the interest rate of this year, 16, 18, the good ones, is not what is declared to the members because there was no investment. Even if the investments of government securities are every 6 months. So the returns for that are probably not yet matured. So the returns they're declaring are on investments that were long-term investments. So you have to go back historically. What were the yields or the interest rates that were being invested upon during that time?
Maybe to bring us to speed together with our viewers, you're talking about the long-term investment and there's a short-term investment. What exactly are you meaning?
When you're talking of long-term investments, you're looking at, I think long-term, there's an accounting principle, but there's what we have. Long-term is something over 2 years, by and large, but anything over 1 year in accounting can be categorized as long-term.
Okay.
But for us, we are talking at long-term instruments, long-term government securities of 15 year, of 10 year, of 5 year. That's a long-term investment. But we are looking at 2, 3 years, that's medium-term. You are trying to look at how you manage your liquidity. But there's also short-term, which are treasury bills. Months, 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, treasury bills. And those are called treasury bills. But that's not what I'm trying to build here, is that when you look at historically, what were the returns that this money that we are looking at today were invested in? The interest was around between 12 and 14%, 11, 12%. So when they declare interest today, it is largely informed by the historical investments that were made in the past. And if you have a concentration of your investments in an asset class that is called government securities, those investments were like that, and the other one that was invested in equities, actually when you look at the equities, they didn't do well, so the performance there was not that significantly good, and that probably that contributed to the lower return. So for us, we say, coupled with the standardized operational costs, which were maintained at 1.3%, and corporate tax, I don't remember the rate that was applied, but the returns they were talking about were around 12%, I think 12 point something percent. The return, gross return on the investment. That rate relates very well with the historical investment returns that we know where the money was being invested. Of course, where we have issues as regulators, this is a policy issue, that even when you net off those amounts, the 9.65% that has been computed is computed on the opening balance. So looking at the opening balance on 1st July 2021.
The start of the financial.
Yeah. So it means that if we were to use the current balance to date, which is around 17 trillion, I think the figure then was around 15.6, thereabout. I don't remember the exact figure. 16? Okay, whichever it is. If we were to use the current figure now, okay, the rate would have been lower than that. So the policy issue needs to be looked into. Why do you declare income on, you've been with my money, you've been investing it for this year, 12 months, but when you're declaring interest, you use the opening balance to declare the interest. And if you're using a lower denominator, mathematically, against a numerator that has run through the year, you can have a rosy interest, the way it is. So from our side, if it were not for the policy structure that needs to be revisited, we pushed this policy proposal to amend the Act, but it was not accepted in Parliament, but we still think we need to revisit it.
Okay.
So the idea is that it would actually have been lower than that if we are using my current balance to date. But having said that, I think from the regulator's perspective, does the income, because for us we go outside the return that has been declared to the member, we look at what really informed this figure. I think the income was around 1.8 trillion.
Okay.
Does it really reflect the true position of the institution? Yes. Do we have a trail of this income from the basic fundamentals and the unpacking of this income? Does it resonate with what we had anticipated from our side? Yes. Does it resonate with the market fundamentals over the time that they're able to declare that kind of interest? We can ably say probably yes.
Okay.
But from the policy perspective, I'm now looking at what should be the ideal situation. Is it using the opening balance or the closing balance? Or at least an average balance,
Okay.
opening and closing balance, to use as the base. That's something that we could be looking at.
You've said in your preamble that initially we would never have such AGMs where even the public is engaged. So that connects me to matters of transparency. You think this is a tick?
Yes. Actually, when I listened to them speaking about 10 years of transparency and accountability, I was very excited because it very well relates with the 10 years of Obra's existence.
Okay.
Our core values include transparency and accountability. Of course, it also has innovation. But the issue here is that even when they would have talked about innovation, they've actually still, they've done very well from that side. They've created vehicles, I mean, operational initiatives that have enhanced their operations. They've innovated the way they are doing their business. I think they need to be given a plus from that side. They've really adopted the governance principles as we required as a regulator. They've complied with the investment guidelines, the issues of prudence, where to invest. I think they've done well on that side. Now, what we need to look into, I think, from the governance side, they have a clear board of trustees. They have a clear reporting mechanism. I think what we now need to do more is where these financial reports also shared to members.
I would think this is an obligation. If I save money with an institution, I think it is a must that I must know how I am performing. So in my thinking, I know it is my obligation.
Correct.
to know.
I think the argument is that as a member, you are allowed to access your statement. You can know your balances at any time. But I think beyond a member, because you sit as now owners of the fund, you don't look at an individual, how my account has been doing. You need to look at how our fund has been doing. The fund is a member-driven fund, a member-owned fund. So a member has the right to know the details, where the money was invested. You can only get to know that from the financial statements. A member has to know how the money, how the expenses were being controlled. All that information is in the financial statement. So a member has the right, like you rightly stated. It is now the trustee's obligation of the fund, that is the fund's obligation to share these details to the member.
Does this report tally with the current economic situations of the country?
In terms of the returns, yes. Because where is this money invested? It's invested in government securities, it's invested in equities. There are local equities in Uganda, there are also local equities in the region, the Kenyan market. What happened in Kenya, we know there were elections, so the equities like Safaricom, I think Equity Bank, whereas they performed, they would have performed better than that. The threats were there, the scares of elections were there.
Okay.
Now, when you come down to our market, I think we've not yet recovered from the COVID issues in terms of, if you are looking at our largest equity here called Wumeme, I don't know whether they declared the dividend this time round, but the last year
I think not
declared.
yet.
Not yet. So the issues of COVID are still there. So those affect the earnings, the income that the scheme is likely to have.
Okay.
So it resonates very well with the dynamics in the economy.
In fact, in that report, two issues. COVID-19 was reflected as a major causing factor, and then the current situation between Russia and Ukraine. Maybe from your projection, if all these...
Of course, I just want something on COVID. Our understanding from the COVID perspective is more informed from the equity side, having the operations being impaired, not declaring dividends. But of course, the argument they gave as the COVID side is because they paid out, actually it's not even, because they paid out midterm access. And midterm access is by and large related to the COVID time.
Roughly about 1.9 trillion.
Yes. If there was no COVID, maybe the agitation for midterm access wouldn't have been that strong. So that's how you can relate the two. So they argue that because of midterm access payment, it impaired the available resource for investment. Yes, fundamentally correct, because they're comparing the flows which are being invested against the fixed amount, which is the opening balance, which is already fixed. Now, if they're comparing the incomes that were being impaired by the return on the investment that has been affected because of payments of midterm access, that would also be reflected in the denominator side if you are to use the closing balance, because if you are reducing on the investment side what is being invested, upon which you are getting the returns, but you are also changing the what? The fundamentals, that's the denominator upon which you are computing your return.
Okay.
But they are giving us a change in the direction of investment return informed by a reduction in investment, pretty correct fundamentally, but the returns that they are using to compute the declared interest to the member is not the current balance to date, but rather the opening balance. So there is need for some harmonization. But like I've said earlier, that's a policy discussion that we need to deal with.
Okay. Moving forward, as we plan to conclude, your parting shots on this critical matter.
First and foremost, we continue to assure members there, when you are in this market, the fund is purely member-driven. So when it makes very good returns, they accrue to the member, like we've seen in the past. If the market is affected by the market, if the fund is affected by the market fundamentals, yes, the returns are likely to be impaired. So in principle is that the member carries the risk of all the returns, of all the good things, or of all the bad things that happen in the market. The beauty is that there's a regulator who oversees all this to ensure that what is declared to the member is a true reflection of what is happening in the market. So there are no excesses, there are no wastages, money is invested in those accepted classes, the operational costs are within those that are limits that have been set, the standards are followed. So in principle, with that kind of framework, when there is a boom in the market, members will enjoy the boom. Of course, when there is irregularities in the market, again, member will be facing that risk. The beauty is that this money is invested in assets that are providing a very good return. If the current returns to date are maintained, the 16%, 18%, just be assured that you'll get even a higher return next year, more than the 12% you got last year. Because the trend we see to date and the returns we see going forward will provide that compensation.
I think with that in-depth discussion, thank you, Mr. Anthony Nsubuga. He's the CEO of the Uganda Retirement Benefit Regulatory Authority. Of course, he's been giving us an insight regarding just the concluded AGM, where the National Social Security Fund issued a report. This is the Coffee Court, and my name is Fred Makubia. We drive your business.
All right, and you've been a great viewer of Business Today, wherever you've been catching us from. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko with Winnie Wiyinza Nakauchi on Sign Language. Till tomorrow, have a blessed night. Good evening.